Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Vivo. Now, when you're talking about Vivo and the reception of this movie, and I think how most people are coloring it, this film is coming out after Sony Animation has, done Mitchell's vs. Machines, which we all universally loved, as did I. And also when we've had two high-profile Lin-Manuel Miranda movies, whatever Hamilton is, a lot of discussion about that. And then we get to Vivo, which has both, and I think is sort of taken down a bit because of basically the sort of recent filmographies of both. And that doesn't mean this movie is bad. I actually think if you take it removed from that context as just an animated film, it's actually probably one of the better ones currently, like by a lot. Like you compare this to like the crap we usually get, like Ugly Dolls or Playmobil or like crappier movies or normal kind of just studio fare. It actually holds up pretty well, and a lot of the music and everything going on with it works. It isn't a perfect movie, and there are actual pretty big problems with it that probably should be talked about a little more, which I am going to. It is interesting. I do think that this film will probably have a better legacy with kids who, probably didn't get to see In the Heights. Like my daughter didn't see In the Heights. She sort of watched Hamilton. She's 4, so it's not really her thing. And if you're a little kid, I think this movie will probably live on because it is a fairly decent film. I think I like Lin-Manuel doing music for animated films with other composers like Moana more than this. But I'm sure because kids seriously still love Moana. I think it was in the Nielsen top stream movies list recently still for no reason, just because Moana is good. And I can see this film having a similar, maybe not as big as Moana, but having a similar shelf life. Like we'll be hearing about this in 2 years or something. I can definitely see that. And I think it's good enough that you're not going to get totally annoyed with it or anything like that. And I don't think the compositions by Lin-Manuel Miranda are worse or, are pretty much on par with what he does. I think I might like some of them better than In the Heights, actually. Maybe because there's all this hype and I'd heard so much about In the Heights, possibly. I think a lot of Lin-Manuel's celebrity sort of, and the context of us watching this, and I'm watching this like when it came out, is because of that. So if you're watching this in the future and like, what the fuck's your guys' deal? That's what it is. I do a lot of references where people watch these 10 years later, which is most nobody. But what this is about is a kinkajou who hangs out with his owner Andres, or owner or collaborator really, and they play in the square in Cuba, basically, and they have a wonderful life. And then he finds out that this singer, Marta, who's voiced by Gloria Estefan, is doing her final show, and she wants Andres to come to that show, as they used to play music a long time ago, and she left to have a big career, and there's some complications of that they don't really get into, and we'll get into in a second. She asked him to come, basically writes him a letter if he could come perform at her final performance or retiring performance. And he's overjoyed, and people really want him to, and so he decides he's going to, and the kinkajou's a little upset at him and runs away just for the night. But when he comes back, she say, okay, let's do this. Andres is dead. During Andres' funeral, he meets this little girl who's like his nephew's daughter, kind of, pretty much, really. And then she really wants to take him home. She goes home. He stows away with him, and then her and the kinkajou are going to take this final beautiful song that Andres wrote for Marta to have her sing, to shows how he felt about her and their journey, to do that through Florida and Miami and the Everglades and all the complications you usually see in an animated film, to show, this outsider girl and this kinkajou are going to kind of band together to get this song to Marta. So this film is much like a film, Chico and Rita, which came out about 11 years ago. It has a similar plot, not entirely, although this was pitched around the time Chico and Rita came out. I'm a little curious if they were aware of that or they used that as a basis. I didn't see anything like that. I didn't search too hard. I don't know, but the similarities are interesting, to say the least. But it was apparently pitched by Lin-Manuel Miranda about 10 years ago, actually. And the screenplay is written by the person who wrote the book for In the Heights, Kira Allegra Howdis, and the story is actually written by Peter Barsuchny, I think, who helped write a lot of the High School Musicals. So this has a very illustrious people who wrote it. I know Lin-Manuel was involved in pitching it. I'm confused if it's his idea or he's just like, hey, if you pitch it, people will love it, guy. Although he pitched it before Hamilton. This coming out now sort of is a development kerfuffle that just sort of happened. But the whole idea of this film, the premise of the big romance that starts this journey is Marta leaves, she becomes a star, and she goes away, and he was about to tell her how he felt about her, and then, she becomes a star, and I guess never comes back is how it's illustrated in the film. Now, the thing they don't talk about in this film, which I kind of thought was a big missed opportunity, and is confusing because it obviously was the reason they haven't seen each other in like 50 years. You couldn't really travel from Cuba to America, and Cuba's borders were pretty closed. I don't know the whole ramifications of that. I know you can go there now. I don't know the full thing, and Castro and all that, and really, I don't expect this movie to go into and explain that to me. However, in Chico and Rita, they explain like you couldn't go to the U.S. It was very hard to do that at that time. Like maybe you could get in a boat and stuff and illegally do that, but you couldn't. It was very hard to do so. So the idea that this film presents is basically that Marta becomes a star and she's like, fuck Cuba, I'm not going back there, and she just doesn't. And like, Andres is just like hanging out and just was like, well, maybe one day, I don't know, I'm old. And that's really, they don't address it. And I thought that was like kind of a major oversight, because that like majorly is a part of this movie they just don't talk about, and I really wish they had. I understand this is primarily a kids film, but like, why are you not talking about it? Because it's obviously a part of the movie. It's a part of the film that you just leave out, and I would love to know like the actual reason. I think it was a mistake, because it's like a part of that history, and this film is about generations and honoring legacies and like what's important about the deceased and things like that, and then to leave a part out kind of like negates like a major theme of the entire movie, and it's like kind of sort of dishonest when you're kind of preaching the idea that you should like be honest and telling yourself is like completely misguided. And I don't expect them to spend like 20 minutes. They could just be like, also, the Cuba thing, and have a nice little sequence and talk about how they were sort of ripped apart. They weren't like, it wasn't the star thing. They were, maybe she did in the 80s or something, think like, or whatever, they were separated. I'm assuming it was pre and post that she did think about going back, and she did try, or he thought about it and stuff, but they can't. And they could have illustrated that, and I think that would have actually made their love even stronger, and the reason for the Kinkajou and the little girl to do that even stronger as well. And I thought that was like a huge, just a major part of the plot that would have driven it a lot better, that they just sort of leave out. And I thought that was like kind of a huge mistake. I don't understand the motivation for doing that. In Chico and Rita, they do talk about it. That is not a family animated film, I understand that, but at the same time, it's a major part of it, and leaving that out, it was a mistake, I think. I just don't, and I don't understand, like, well, then why have it take place in Cuba then? Like what's the purpose of this exact plot if you're not going to talk about? Anyway, I just thought it was a really bad idea. But other than that, I think the other thing is the little girl and the Kinkajou plot does feel like you have this like major overarching interesting thing about these, older musicians, and then you have this little kid plot thing in the middle, which some I worked, some I didn't. I liked the little girl, but I do understand she feels very post Mitchell's vs. Machines. There's a part where she actually shows her mom like a little cartoon she makes, which literally felt like they took, like, we're like, hey, what worked in this other movie? I was like, wow, you guys, like, they don't do it a lot. It was just quick. In some ways, I find her character interesting because she is kind of like this unique, different kind of little girl, and like her song, which I think is like trying to be like hyper pop or something. It annoys a lot of people. I sort of was okay with it. Thought it was kind of cool. But I think mainly her uniqueness is sort of, and her difference is I thought the point of her character actually was that it was maybe more performative, like what kids I think go through, than actual, because why would the Girl Scouts want her with them so bad? Like, clearly she gets along with them. Clearly they know, like, if she was like this different kid, the Girl Scouts would be picking on her, not wanting her to be with them. And I thought that was like actually an interesting point to do with like a different kid, because so many times when you have like this different, weirder kid, it's like everyone's like, whatever. And this is trying to say like, well, you are different and weird, but we actually do accept you and want you in the Girl Scouts and stuff like that. And I don't think it was just about selling cookies, but maybe I'm misreading that, but I thought that was actually an interesting place to take it. It's very colorful. Roger Deakins was a visual consultant on this, and you can tell, which might be his first Sony movie, I'm not sure. The animation was good, and I think very colorful and very joyful and stuff, but it does feel like a film that doesn't fully get into what it should. And the Cuba thing, I think, was a major fault, especially because, like, I don't need kids films to be political, but when you're dancing around something that's obviously part of your plot, like I really don't understand that. And then the lin-manuel music is, I get that was like the part of this, and this was written probably between In the Heights and Hamilton, I think, something like that. A lot of it was developed, and it like moved from DreamWorks to Sony and all that stuff. And its timing is kind of just between COVID and its long development. Who the hell knows when this should have come out? But I think it mostly works, and it's probably like a little bit better than a lot of these things. But I think what really hurts it is the main driving action is involving other people. And I think lin-manuel is very good at writing, and his team of people and all that stuff are good at writing these things that talk about legacy and history and the importance of that and family, and they're very good at those things. But I think the connection between, I might like some of the music in this more, but the connection of the plot between the older generation and the younger one didn't fully connect. It almost felt like him dying was like, oh well, we got to do something with this old guy because we can't have him in the whole movie, even though he was voiced by one of the guys, Juan D. Marcos Gonzalez, who's part of the Buena Vista Social Club. I just feel like they could have done more to connect those two, and it felt like you're sort of watching two different movies. And like there were a lot of details that almost felt like they needed to be fleshed out more, and could have been, and it was like right there. And I'm not asking for something that would be inappropriate for a family film. I think that's something we should talk about. The idea of closed borders and separation of family is like totally relevant, like always, because humans are awful, and definitely something we should talk about, and would be even more wonderful talking about, like, I don't know, that really bugged me the more I thought about it. And I did like the musical numbers, Brian Tyree Henry, things like that. Zoe Saldana was great. I liked a large majority of this film, but I think it's very cute and beautiful. I just think a lot of the storytelling dynamics were opposed to what it's trying to do, and it should have fleshed these things out and not felt like two different movies. And it's kind of like a very well done, flawed film. That's unfortunate, because I do think it had a lot of the right elements. And I think, lin-manuel kind of developing an animated film, this almost feels like an animated film. He and these people, and Kirk DeMico, who also co-directed The Croods and Space Chimps, but mostly, let's just talk about The Croods. He does a really good job, and he's a good director. He worked with Chris Sanders on The Croods. I expect more stuff from him, and I think this shows, like, if this is like almost being treated as an average Sony animated film, that's actually pretty great. It's not the highs that the studio can do, but I think it shows you, like, it's pretty amazing what the studio can do right now. I think, like, maybe something like, we've also seen Wish Dragon, we've also seen Mitchell's vs. Machines, we've seen so much from them. This doesn't feel like on par, but it gets pretty close, I gotta say. I think this might be probably the worst written of the films I've seen with lin-manuel music recently, but I still find it, a pretty good ride, and I had fun while watching it. I think kids will get into it, but I wish it had talked about the realities that it kind of more wanted to mythologize, and maybe that's a Lin-Manuel Miranda problem and his book writer's problem or something, but I wish they'd really talked about something that I think was an unsaid thing that ended up hurting this film by not being truly honest about who they were and their relationship with the material, much like Andres wasn't honest with himself. It's kind of weird when the protagonists in this film are trying to fight against and correct the very flaw that is the problem with the film in itself. So if you've seen Vivo and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.